The items that I'm going to make in this portion of the DVD, they're all based on this Indian blanket design. This particular type of assembly is profiled in both my book and my Volume 2 DVD, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to assemble these little pieces of wood. It starts with accurately milled material. These happen to be about 1.5 inches wide and 3/4 inches thick. So after a lot of cross-cutting at about 22.5 degree angle, I've put these components together using a special tray. Those strips were cleaned up and then ripped on a table saw. I've arranged these kinds of designs using those strips. After the glue job the next day, take them apart, clean them up, chop them into pieces, and then add those pieces to form these designs. The question now is, what do I do with them? I think they can be incorporated into a number of different items. To get started, I'm going to take the larger of the two sizes, and I'm going to try to incorporate this into a woman's hairpiece, a barrette. Before starting these barrettes, you're going to need some hardware. I found these online. You can see the address here, and they're available in a variety of sizes. Now, by putting this against my block, I can confirm that I've got enough thickness to take care of that radius. After a little trial and error, I figured out that in order to get that kind of curve, I need a diameter of about 9.5 inches. Well, to give myself a little extra fudge factor, if you will, do the calculation: 9.25 inches times pi, that's 29 inches, and when divided by 8, that comes out to about 3 5/8 inches. Now that's not the outside dimension of the segments, but the inside dimension in order to create that kind of curve. Here I'm just marking each one, lining it up on a pencil mark so I can get a consistently positioned cut on one end of all of them, adjusting a stop block to match the cut on the other side. My goal now is to surround these with another layer of maple, a border. Double-sided tape on MDF here allows me to trim the two sides. I'm chopping out some little short pieces of ingrained maple, gluing those on the ends, sanding, smoothing up the sides so I can put maple along the edges. This is just a one step after another step kind of process. It's a glue step followed by some sanding, followed by more trimming. I want my maple to be about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little under that, all the way around my design. Then I'm going to surround it with ebony. Same process all over again, bigger pieces of ebony. Again, all the wood grains going the same direction. Trimming the sides, getting ready for the last piece of ebony to go along the edges. Again, same kind of glue step. So my assembly is complete, but I want a smooth surface. I'll mount those on double-sided tape, run them through the drum sander to get parallel smooth surfaces. That allows me to use two different styles of stop block in order to trim the ends. I'm just taking a smidgen off the face. This is a test fit. I want to check the diameter. I need that inside radius to be close to my barrette hardware. I came within 1/4 inch. If I needed to, I could have put spaces in between to get a bigger diameter, or I could have trimmed them a little bit smaller, but as it turned out, I was close enough. To prepare this for turning, I've taken a disc of MDF, mounted it on a screw, turned it round, and fitted it up to the outside of this ring. 8 hot melt dabs around the outside and 4 on the inside secure it pretty well. Just doing some conventional turning, getting it round. I'm going to end up with a very slight curve from edge to edge, but it'll be fairly straight. Because this ring is fairly fragile, it doesn't have rings on either side of it to bricklay it. I installed those big rubber bands. Now I'm proceeding on the inside. I want a wall thickness of about 1/4 inch, maybe a little under 1/4 inch. A little power sanding will finish up this portion of the inside. So now I need to reverse this, so I'll turn away this wood and the hot melt, leaving just those 4 dabs on the inside. Get those off, Take the MDF disc back to the lathe and turn a very short tenon that will fit as a jam chuck. Nice fit there, 4 dabs of hot melt on the inside. Allow me to carefully clean up that one edge that was to the inside before I reversed it. Here I'm just checking the squareness of my shape. I'm almost done checking the squareness on the outside. After a little power sanding to get that hot melt off the inside, I'm installing about 3-4 pieces of that tape. That'll temporarily hold that ring in place while I turn away most of the hot melt. A little utility knife work and some power sanding cleans up those 4 spots. The bandsaw does quick work of separating all these right on the seams. To clean up the corners on all these pieces, I've put a piece of tape on my disc sander table. That avoids scratching the surface. Rounded the corners, a little power sanding work, a little sanding mop work. These are ready for finish. I'm starting the finish process with Universal Sanding Sealer. I applied several coats of the sanding sealer, buffing in between with the sanding mop, and finished the process with a couple of coats of Spray Death. After the last buffing job, all that remains is to put the clips on. I've roughed both surfaces, the metal and the wood, and I'm using this E6000. It's a very good adhesive for putting metal to wood. The tape obviously is protective. This E6000 glue seems to work very well, but it's messy, it's sticky, rubbery stuff. I'd let these glue joints sit overnight if at all possible. Here's a pair of smaller Indian blankets. One's different than the other, but it's the same procedure. Double-sided tape, turning, getting them fitted up to outer rims, and then turning again, getting the outside diameters just right with a slight taper, parting them off, and then repeating the process over and over. Here are 2 different pairs. They're ready to go into ebony now. Same procedure, getting an ebony ring around these. A little turning, a little sanding, part it off, and then use the leftover for the next one. Now this next one's a little different. I've scored a line and used dividers to give me 16 locations to drill a little hole. I'm using solid silver wire 14 gauge, which is a tight fit in about a 1/16 of an inch hole. A little CA glue, and you gotta have some needle nose pliers. It's a tight fit. It takes some persuasion to get those in there. But this will turn just like wood, but you want to go a little slower and sharpen more frequently. But the silver is fairly soft and it does turn. The same procedures follow this, but this is a little big for an earring. This will end up being a belt buckle or maybe a bolo. The back, same procedure. Tap it into a jam chuck, a little turning, score some lines, and these will be ready for finish. You always have to plan ahead, and that includes how to extract things from jam chucks. Here, a small dowel with a padded point does the job. The only real difference here is instead of just 2 layers, I'm putting 3 layers around the perimeter, starting with the ebony gone to maple. The last layer includes a bottom, which needs to be flat. That's what that little piece of wood was confirming. Notice also all the wood grain continues to go the same direction. Before proceeding to the next projects, let's finish these off with the hardware installation. Pretty basic, using the E6000, roughing both the wood and the metal surfaces and clamping these in place. These will be belt buckles, obviously. For bolos, I'm using this hardware, and the installation is pretty basic as well. Protecting the surfaces, roughing the surfaces, applying the glue, and clamping this backing in place. For the string installation, they slip through these openings and they're held in place by a strong spring. The tips on the end of this braided leather cord simply slip over, and then you crimp the ends to hold them in place. Another option is to turn your own wooden tips for the cords. Here's a couple of little pieces of ebony. being turned into a very simple shape, scoring a few lines here. To finish off the bottom tip, I'll just turn this around, protect it with a layer of tape. A little sanding finishes off the tip, a little deft gloss, and a little E6000 to glue them in, and those are done. This next bracelet project is a little more involved. I've taken 8 of the small Indian blankets, cut off the ends, and added maple to each end. Then I used my disc sander, created a flat surface, mounted them on double-sided tape, and ran those through the table saw to trim the edges. The ends were then trimmed, little pieces of ebony were added, more disc sanding, and another pass through the drum sander to create flat parallel surfaces. This is followed by adding a thin 1/4 inch thick piece of ebony to the bottoms of these. Then those are trimmed using the table saw and disc sander to allow me to put ebony along the sides. Now these extensions will come into play later, at least I hope they will. I've drawn a little sketch here to help you understand this. I want a finished inside diameter of just under 2 3/8 inches, we'll call it 2.35. That means my inside glue up needs to be smaller than that, so I'm going to shoot for a 2 1/4 inch inside diameter when I put 8 of these together. So I've drawn a circle 2 1/4 inches in diameter. Just using the squares on my graph paper, I can easily divide this into 8 segments, and that means I can measure from point to point to point and determine my inside distance on these mitered pieces. And in this case, it measures out about 0.84. So my next step is to miter these to fit together to create an inside diameter of about 2 1/4 inches. This here just shows you a likely shape of each one of those segments. You know, a lot of work went into these, and I really do not want to make the mistake of getting these cut too small. I can't make them bigger if I cut them too small. So what I've done is I've milled just a piece of MDF that measures the exact same dimensions as my pieces. So to the table saw I go. A couple of passes at 22.5 degrees, checking the width of the inside. It was a little big, adjust. Now I've cut that piece into short pieces so I can do a test. Put a rubber band around this. I can confirm my inside diameter. I'm very close. One of these little pieces can also help me determine how much material to take off in this first pass. I'm using a large push block, which will give me a good result. I'm making one pass on all of them, moving the fence in, and taking a similar amount of material off the other side, checking the dimensions and the widths of those borders. Eventually I'll get what I really need is an inside diameter of about 2 1/4 inches. This design is made up of 8 components, each individually ribbed to create that surface. To create those ribs, my plan is to take 4 at a time using double-sided tape and locking them together, creating a smaller radius than the final bracelet radius. I've filled in the voids with some little slivers of wood and locked this all together with lots of rubber band pressure. That's where those little extensions come into play. Now I should be able to turn a smaller radius than my completed bracelet radius. However, it didn't work out too well. Well, this is a little embarrassing. I've made a real mess of this project. I was going to start all over and edit out this portion, but I figured, well, I've learned something, I might as well pass that on. Here's what happened. The extensions that where my finger's pointing were just too skinny, too weak, and as I turned wood away, they became increasingly weaker, and eventually this thing collapsed on itself. Pieces didn't go flying everywhere, but I had to come up with a different plan. So to salvage my project, here's what I've done. I've taken my pieces, my Indian blanket pieces, I cut off the little wings that stuck out, and I glued them with Titebond right to a little board of maple about 2 inches wide and half an inch thick. And I've even put some little support pieces here on the sides. This I should be able to put between centers and turn without having things fly apart. So let's see how this works compared to my first attempt. The first challenge is to make sure it's centered. So by just nicking those corners and checking the scored marks, I can confirm. If I need, I can adjust that little end point. Proceed to turn, sand. I've got a nice little radius there. To duplicate that, it's so small, it's pretty easy to eyeball, but also a pair of these calipers can check the various diameters at both the middle and the ends. Pretty quick and easy, but it's a chore now to get rid of all that extra maple. By using 2 clamps like this, I can cut that middle section out and then carefully whittle off the sides, remove the last of the maple on the disc sander. My challenge now is to create a nice smooth surface on the inside. I've created a jam chuck out of MDF, fairly snug fit with tape inside to protect my surfaces, not super tight. These saw kerfs will allow me now to put a hose clamp around this and cinch up around the 8 components. A very nice snug tight fit. I don't want anything to move when I turn the inside of this. A little duct tape keeps things nice and tidy. Now I can go at the inside of this. I can use a bowl gouge, or I can use an easy wood tool, whatever kind of tool you like. I have to measure, check squareness. I want a 2 1/4 inch inside diameter and take advantage of the opportunity to sand it as well. Now I can go on to the next step, which is drilling some holes. These 8 pieces are going to be linked together with a very special type of stainless steel wire. This stainless steel memory wire is pretty unique stuff. It's very springy. It comes in a tight coil, as you can see, and it resists being straightened. It acts actually as a spring. It's a small diameter wire, but I don't want to have to straighten it to go through a straight hole in my bangle pieces here. So I've done some testing and come up with a drill bit that, when drilled straight through there, allows the memory wire to stay in its curved position through the piece of wood. To accurately drill the holes, I've created a jig here on my drill press with a 22.5 degree sloped support. That fits the miter on these pieces of wood. Without that sloped support, if I tried to drill them flat, they would rock back and forth and I would not be able to drill as accurate a hole. I'm using a brad point bit, which is important since I'm entering the wood on a sloped surface. After drilling the center holes, I would then move the stop block to the left, do the end holes on one end of all of them, then move the stop block a third time to do the other end, always maintaining the blue tape in the same position. The last step before final assembly is about 4 or 5 coats of spray def buffed in between coats. It's really fussy work to thread the wire through all these holes. The wire ends overlap each other. You'll end up with almost 2 rotations or trips around through the holes. Cutting this stuff is difficult. It's stainless steel. Don't use your fine little cutoff pliers. Use something beefier. Here's the last of the 3 trips around, and the cumulative effect holds this together quite nicely. You're certainly not limited to using Indian blanket designs for these types of projects. Many other designs could be used. Your only limitation really is your imagination.